Let's turn our attention now to producer and consumer surplus if a market is not allowed to reach equilibrium. So here we have the same market, the market for iced tea. This is our point of equilibrium. $5 would be the price if this market were left alone. But let's say some authority, like a government, comes into this market and says, $5 is too low. People can't survive on $5. There ought to be a law. Prices should be $7.50 or higher. In fact, you can't go below $7.50. We know that's a price floor, and I've drawn that on here in green with this little arrow signifying that you can't go below that. I like to do that to remind myself about the price floor and its direction. All right, so if that's true, a government says you can't go below $7.50. Well, how many units are sold? Before we would have seen 20 units sold, but now because price is higher, fewer people want to buy this good, so we hit the demand curve here and only 10 units are sold. Now we can see what happens to consumer and producer surplus given this price floor now that a government has intervened. All right, so consumer surplus, what happens to that? Well, first of all, we know that consumer surplus is everything above the prevailing price, that's $7.50 in this case, and below the demand curve. All right, so consumer surplus is that area right there, and if that's true, then the formula for that is 1/2 base times height. This is your new base, right? It's only 10 units wide, not 20 units wide like before. It's 10 units wide, so it's 1/2 10, and that is $2.50. So 10 times $2.50, well, that's $25, but you got to multiply it by half. So consumer surplus is now $12.50, right? $2.50 times 10 units, that's $25, cut in half because it's a triangle. So half 10 times 250 is $12.50. Recall before, consumer surplus, when we had equilibrium, when we reached that point there, was $50. So consumers are a lot worse off, right? They used to enjoy $50 in surplus, now they enjoy $12.50 in surplus. And that should make sense to you. They're worse off because prices are higher. Now what happens to producer surplus? Well, producer surplus is everything below the prevailing price but above the supply curve. So what do they get? They get this strange area right here, right? Everything below the green line but above the supply curve. That's this area. Okay, how do you calculate the area of that weird shape? Well, you go through two steps. First of all, you make it a rectangle and then a triangle. So producer surplus, and we'll label it blue or give it a legend of blue there, equals, there's two parts here. So first the rectangle. Rectangle is base times height. So that's $5 times 10, right? 10 wide is the base. $5 from 250 to 750, that's the height. So 5 times 10 is 50, and then we got to get that triangle. That triangle is 250 high and 10 wide. So a triangle is half base times height. So we're going to add to this 50 whatever we get here, which equals 1/2. The base is 10. The height is 250. Again, that equals $25 times a half is $12.50. Okay, add that back to the $50 that we get out of that triangle, and that's $62.50. That's producer surplus. Consumers are worse off. They went from $50 to $12.50. Producers are better off. They went from $50 to $62.50. And that should make sense to you. Prices are higher. Of course they're going to like that. Now, if you're paying attention to all this, you're probably observing something. Before, societal surplus was 100. Now, when you add these two together, you get only, what is that, $75. Something's missing. What's missing? And what we call that in economics is dead weight loss. And this is why economists don't like when governments interfere in markets. Or some economists, I should say. Dead weight loss. That's this whole area right here, this triangle. And what is the value, or what is the area of that triangle? Well, it's $5 tall, right, from 250 to 750. That's how tall it is. And it's 10 wide from 10 to 20, so it's 1/2 base times height. So you get times height, which equals 1/2. The base is 10. The height is 5. 10 times 5 is 50, but multiply that by half, and you get, there's your missing $25. So now these three should equal each other, right? 25 plus 62.50 plus 12.50. We're back to the 100, but this piece is missing. It never happened. These 10 units were never sold because consumers didn't want them at that higher price. And this is why economists tend to argue against intervening in markets. Our societal surplus has dropped by $25. That's our deadweight loss. Societal surplus in this case, given this price floor, is only $75. It's producer surplus and consumer surplus added together.